This is
Make it plain.
Make it plain.
MIP
With Masamela Matfumo.
Mark Thompson.
Make it plain.
Get woke.
Ladies and gentlemen, on this Martin Luther King Jr. Day, we're happy to have with us an award-winning author who has written many books on the Black church and on Dr. King, including There is a Balm in Gilead, the cultural roots of Martin Luther King Jr., To Make the Wounded Whole, the cultural legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., and Never Leave Us Alone, the prayer life of Martin Luther King Jr. He is a professor emeritus, I should say, of religious studies at Vanderbilt University, Nashville, Tennessee, my hometown, and much of Nashville's Black faith community has become more and more connected to the university as a result of great scholars like this. And we're thankful for that. We're here today to talk about his latest and obviously timely work in light of the holiday before us, The Arc of Truth, Thinking of Martin Luther King Jr. Professor Lewis Baldwin joins us on Make It Plain. Happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day, Dr. Baldwin.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's an honor to have you here with us, and thank you for all your prolific work and study of Dr. King. There's never too much that can be written about him. Now, in this climate of truth, Lord have mercy, I don't know where it's gone. Folks, we could have almost done a whole broadcast on Dr. Baldwin and I talking about our intersecting histories in Nashville.
Yeah.
And I was sharing with him some of my family's pedigrees. Many members of my family were educators. Dr. Baldwin, I want to start this way. Thinking of Dr. King and his generation.
Yeah.
My parents, all of those. I think if some of them were alive today, remember how people said that Obama was post-racial? I think now what we're really in is post-truth, post-factual.
That's right.
If they saw the dishonesty, the disinformation that we see running rampant today, Dr. Baldwin, I really think they would have had a very, very difficult time with that, don't you?
Yeah, I think so. And I think Dr. King would be speaking out about it. There's an absence of figures like him who are willing to really speak truth to power. And that's what we need today. A transformational prophetic figure like Dr. King. I think he'd be speaking out. A lot of those leaders back at that time would really be speaking out about the dangers of this post-truth age.
I think, too, we may need to acknowledge that when he was alive, there was a level of respect that even some in media had. We didn't have the proliferation of media we have today. We didn't have social media.
Right.
I shudder to think how he would have been treated in this age of hyper scrutiny, hyper disinformation, particularly disinformation targeting the Black community. How he would have been treated under those circumstances. That worries me.
Yes, me also. He did experience some of that, as you well know, during his lifetime, because there was a lot of disinformation, conspiracy theory during that time. But I think it's worse today. We are witnessing this kind of thing on an unprecedented level. So I shudder to think, as you, what would be happening to him. I think he would be persecuted even more. And it probably would have been assassinated earlier, because these the political violence fueled by the lies and the conspiracy theories and the disinformation. They're just almost unbelievable, certainly unprecedented.
You're absolutely right. So let's start this way, the arc of truth. Talk to us about truth in the context of Dr. King and his quest for truth.
Yes, well, Dr. King's quest for truth began in childhood. And we have to take into account the fact that he had a questioning attitude toward life even as a child. He was always asking questions about the world around him, about the established order of things. Daddy King makes this point in his autobiography. Said, my son was always raising questions, trying to understand the world around him. So at age 6, he lost a white playmate due to his playmate's father's racism. And King asked his mother, why do white people hate us? And at age 6, she sat him on her knee and she explained to him the facts of life, he says. She told him about slavery and segregation as part of the social order, but not a natural order. And from that point on, I think that quest for truth sort of escalated, if I might use that terminology, when he left high school at age 15 to enter Morehouse College. I recall one of the letters of recommendation written on his behalf by a member at Ebenezer described him as an avid seeker after truth. And he was only 15 then. So I would say that's why I've argued in the book that this search for truth for Dr. King was lifelong, beginning in early childhood, extending through his academic pilgrimage at Morehouse, Boston, Crozer, into his involvement in the civil rights movement. He saw the civil rights movement as the practical application of the kinds of truths that he had been taught and had learned about in the academic settings. So it was certainly a lifelong search for truth.
You mentioned the academic setting.
Yeah.
In his religious study, talk to us a bit about how he was exposed to the truth or the quest for truth there in studying scripture, in studying philosophy. Talk to a little bit about, if you would, how truth came to him through that experience.
Yes, we know that in his early years, he had what he described as unlettered Sunday school teachers who believed in biblical inerrancy, biblical literalism. And even as a child, Dr. King struggled with a literal reading of the Bible. You remember at age 12, 13, he questioned the resurrection. He struggled with biblical fundamentalism during those early years. And when he got to Morehouse College at age 15, he grew and he chose liberalism over fundamentalism, because liberalism talks a lot about the use of reason in the pursuit of truth, the importance of philosophy and theology as paths to truth. And it's interesting, Dr. King said, when I went to college, I had a deep interest in theology and philosophy because I had read some theology and read some philosophy, and I had come to see that they afford paths to truth, not the kind of biblical fundamentalism that I was exposed to at Ebenezer Baptist Church by these unlettered Sunday school teachers.
No, that's important. As a matter of fact, just recently, something I'm sure you're aware of, it was suggested I look up a paper. I was visiting one of the leading African jewelry makers here in New York by the name of Baba Heru.
Yeah.
And he makes African jewelry from Egypt or Kemet. As a matter of fact, some of you may hear Eric, the musician, Eric Badu, talk about him because he makes a lot of jewelry. Okay. And he says, Mark, are you aware that Dr. King wrote about the origins of religion in Egypt at one time in his life? And I said, I didn't know that. And I Googled it. It's actually at the Stanford Papers Project.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at it and it blew my mind.
Yes.
That again, these were all a lot of the things that we think we're just discovering today. Dr. King, questioning these things and seeking these truths even back in the 50s. So he definitely was a truth seeker.
Yes, absolutely. And I suspect that his reading of W.E.B. Du Bois, I need to do some more research on that, had a lot to do with his interest, much of his interest in Africa, particularly ancient Egypt and Ethiopia.
That's right.
Because Du Bois, as you well know, was living in Atlanta when Dr. King was growing up there. He ran in circles that Dr. King's father, the same kinds of circles with Benny Mays and Martin Luther King Sr. and all of them. So he had that kind of exposure.
Yes, sir.
And of course, the Atlanta Daily World, the only Black daily newspaper published in Atlanta, getting in 1928, the King family subscribed religiously to that newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
And often there were stories about what was going on in Africa and stories about ancient Egypt. So he had that kind of exposure also.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Was there any relationship between his quest for truth and his conviction toward nonviolence?
Yes, he came to see, as you well know, that nonviolence for him was the ethical equivalent of truth. He often spoke of nonviolence as truthful means to achieve the truthful ends of the beloved community. And much of that came from his reading of Gandhi, of course, because Gandhi's principle of satyagraha simply means that truth is equal love force or justice. So it came from his reading of Gandhi. It came also from his reading of the New Testament, particularly the 5th chapter of Matthew, of the Beatitudes. So the Jesus ethic was quite important also. I would say that King came to a sense of the Jesus ethic before he actually studied Gandhi. And that kind of exposure prepared the way for his acceptance of Gandhi. So nonviolence is truth, the way of truth in Dr. King's thinking.
And then ultimately the weapon of nonviolence, a weapon of truth against injustice. Injustices themselves are lives.
Yeah.
So it's like, I think if this would happen to anybody, once you open that door, you really can't close it. The pursuit of truth becomes your being, does it not?
It becomes the very essence of the person. Dr. King, he saw this as a life pilgrimage. He felt that every rational and moral person engages in such a search. It's inescapable because in this pursuit of truth, or this quest for truth, we get a better understanding of humanity, a better understanding of the world around us, a better understanding of life and our connectedness as human beings to each other and to a higher power. All of this comes into focus through this lifelong quest for truth.
No, that is very important. We mentioned at the outset how King might have been treated today in this era of disinformation. We know he experienced it in his life. We know how prevalent it is today.
Mm-hmm.
You address some of that. You talk about some of his own personal challenges.
Yeah.
How did his quest for truth deal with that then, and how might he have dealt with that today, do you think?
Well, he understood that there was certain risk involved in the search for truth. If you recall, he spoke of the search for truth as a cross that the prophet bear. And so he expected to be persecuted. And also he expected at some point to lose his life because of his commitment to truth, his effort to translate truthful means into truthful ends. He knew the risk involved. And sort of like the Bonhoeffer view, when Christ bids a man to come, he bids him come and die. And Dr. King, in his Easter sermons, and I'm sure you've read some of those sermons, he often talked about Good Friday as representing, in a sense, untruth, and the resurrection, representing the triumph of truth over untruth. And this is how he understood it. I mean, to bear truth, to speak truth is really bearing a cross. And when we bear that cross, we must be prepared for whatever happens, because the risk to our very lives, of course, is always a possibility.
Essentially, for those who are Christian,
Mm-hmm.
taking up, seeking the truth rather, is itself taking up the cross of Christ in the way Dr. King did.
Yeah, yeah.
Truth.
And it's redemptive too, he said. You know, when you pick up the truth, when you elevate truth and pursue truth, you may lose your life, but there's something redemptive in Dr. King's thinking about this.
Right. There's still something there. Is there, we associate Dr. King obviously a great deal with love
Mm-hmm.
and the principle of love. Is there a relationship, Dr. Baldwin, between the pursuit of truth and the pursuit of love?
Yes, Dr. King spoke of love and justice as dimensions of truth. You really can. He talked about this interrelationship between love, power, justice, and truth. And of course, we know the impact of that Paul Tillich had on his understanding. Paul Tillich's book, Love, Power, and Justice, and also Mohandas K. Gandhi were two very important influences on his understanding of the interrelationship between love, justice, power, and truth.
And that too is very, very important.
Yeah.
We have this holiday now. What are your thoughts about the popular way in which Dr. King is remembered? What you've discussed with us today is extraordinary, is that very few people are talking about what you and I are talking about on this holiday. Most people, it's very small focus, usually on the March on Washington.
Yeah.
You mentioned Du Bois, folks. The doctor mentioned Du Bois. By the way, folks, we should acknowledge that Dr. King himself acknowledged at the Lincoln Memorial that Du Bois had passed away the
day before.
The eve of the March on Washington. And he and A. Philip Randolph pretty much singled that out as a significant historical occurrence in terms of the shift in generation and the passing of the torch. And for them to acknowledge Du Bois, who at that time was radical to even acknowledge him, because at that time he was in exile pretty much.
In Ghana,
in Ghana, in Africa. But what are your thoughts? Is there enough emphasis on the myriad dimensions of Dr. King, or are our celebrations and our remembrances and recognitions still too one-dimensional?
I think so. I think the late Vincent Harding was right when he said that the problem is that we freeze King on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, where he talks about little white boys and little white girls holding hands. I mean, certainly he believed in integration, but what about the King of 1968, I See the Promised Land, who attacked capitalism, who called for a radical redistribution of economic resources in the interest of the poor, who attacked U.S. involvement in Vietnam? We want to domesticate King, and we see that happening in our society today. We don't want to deal with the heroic and radical dimension of his legacy. And so we freeze him on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. The King of I Have a Dream was quite different from the King of I See the Promised Land. And I think we forget that. And particularly disturbing for me, of course, is how many on the extreme right-wing spectrum are distorting Dr. King's words, using his words against affirmative action, against critical race theory. And the gubernatorial candidate from Arizona, who lost the election, said that if King were alive today, he would be an America First Republican. But I found in reading volume 6 of Dr. King's papers that in late 1950s, he actually gave a sermon on worshiping the false gods of nationalism, in which he attacked the America First Committee that was founded in 1940. And he said that that committee was isolationist. It was really about white supremacy. And he equated it with the movements of Hitler and Mussolini and McCarthyism. So he attacked America First back in the late 50s, that concept. So I'm very disturbed at the ways in which certain figures on the right wing of the political spectrum, distorting Dr. King's word, hijacking his words in order to advance a conservative, social, cultural, and political agenda for this country.
As a matter of fact, even during the debate around the election of the House Speaker, one individual, they were, as we all saw, they put Congressman Byron Donald's name up a few times from Florida.
I remember.
And one of the white members of Congress, I don't remember who it was, said, this is an example of what Dr. King talked about, putting somebody forward, not because of the color of their skin, but the content of their character. But it just clear, blatantly expropriating Dr. King's words toward their partisan political end. We've seen that.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you're right. We have some radical messages. He said, I'm afraid we've been integrating into a burning house.
Exactly.
He said that, which kind of supersedes the steps. Talks about integration on the steps. Now, if Louis Baldwin and Mark Thompson say, I'm on the steps and this is what I see, us together. And then a few years later, we say, y'all, I don't know about this. This is burning up. I think we would want people to pick up at the last thing we said.
Yes, and Dr. King was raising serious questions about integration toward the end of his life.
Yes.
And he even said in his last speech, written piece, which was published posthumously, a testament of hope that perhaps we need to think in terms of temporary segregation.
Yes. Because
he felt that blacks needed the time and space to create some power to bring to the integration process.
Yes.
You see, you don't want to go to an integration process completely powerless.
Yes.
And so he was very clear on that. And a lot of people forget integration for him meant not only mutual acceptance and intergroup and interpersonal living, it also meant shared power. And that's the dimension that often gets lost in our discussions about Dr. King's philosophy of integration.
No, you're absolutely right. These are all important concepts to understand. He had even, at times he was reticent about the notion of Black power even, but when he gave his final speech at the SCLC, he said, Black is beautiful.
Yeah.
And he understood it more. So the King who would have remained with us, I think we have a better glimpse of what would have been, what might have become. And he was, as our esteemed guest has said to us, folks, in constant pursuit of the truth. And maybe that's how we ought to start thinking about the holiday.
Exactly.
Let's pursue the truth again. Right, Dr. Baldwin? Is that not what we should?
Yes, it's particularly important in these post-truth times. Because lying, as one commentator says, has been elevated to a new art form.
Yeah.
Not only politicians, but preachers and radio and television talk show hosts. Lying had become the norm and not simply a deviation from the norm.
Yes, sir.
And it's hard to get people to a place of reality because so many succumb to these conspiracy theories and this reality distortion world. So I think you're so right in saying truth should be the key word, I think.
Yes, sir.
As we celebrate Dr. King in 2023. No question about it.
No question about it. I agree with you, and we appreciate you. Folks, if you want to spend the holiday doing something and beyond the holiday, it's always important to read about Dr. King. He was a scholar. Here is a scholar writing about Dr. King. Let's continue. We can't get all our knowledge and education from Netflix. It's okay. Go back to reading some books, y'all. It's okay.
Yes.
The Ark of Truth
Yeah.
The Thinking of Martin Luther King Jr. by Professor Lewis V. Baldwin, Professor Emeritus of Religious Studies at Vanderbilt University, available everywhere. The Ark of Truth. Please read. Please, ma'am. Please, sir. Dr. Baldwin, such a pleasure to meet you, and so warm to know that you are in my home. Next time I'm in Nashville, I'm going to have to come by and see you.
Yes, I hope to see you in Selma.
That's right.
In March.
Oh, are you going to come? You'll be there in March.
I plan to be there.
Wonderful. We look forward to seeing you there as well.
Yes.
Folks, just so everyone knows, this will be this year. It's the 58th for Selma, but the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington.
That's right.
The 60th anniversary of Medgar Evers.
Yes, it's assassination.
The 60th anniversary of the Birmingham 16th Street Baptist
Church bombing. Yes.
And the 60th anniversary of the Birmingham movement and the Children's Crusade.
That's right.
And all of this was happening in that very short span of time after the March on Washington in 63. So these will be some sacred times, and we need to renew ourselves, renew our knowledge.
Yeah.
Seek the truth. I'll be honest, this is one of the most important messages I think we've shared on the Martin Luther King Jr. Holiday. And it's important because I know you do, Professor Baldwin, when Ronald Reagan was a nemesis of mine all the days he lived.
Absolutely.
And when he would not sign the bill.
That's right.
And he said Dr. King was a communist.
That's right.
He saw him as a radical. But then, as it says in scripture, to see those images, that video, those pictures of Mrs. King standing over him while he had to sign that legislation. Thou prepares the table. He was writing on the table. Thou prepares the table.
Yeah.
Before me in the presence of my enemies. He had to make it so. We have a duty.
Yes.
Folks, to make this holiday live up to the true meaning of Dr. King's creed.
Yes, exactly. That's well put. Excellently put.
And that's what Professor Baldwin is challenging us to do with his great work and his great scholarship. So, folks, please, the Ark of Truth. Make that your Martin Luther King Jr. Day. I think people should give each other gifts on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, just like Christmas. Give this book out. People can be informed and knowledgeable in this post-truth disinformation era.
Thank you.
God bless you, Dr. Baldwin. Thank you.
God bless you, man. Looking forward to seeing you.
Thanks for getting woke and listening to Make It Plain. As always, perform an act of kindness on behalf of an elder or young person. Write a letter to a sister or brother who just so happens to find her or himself incarcerated. Offer libations to the ancestors upon whose sturdy shoulders we all now stand. And above all, give thanks to the God of your understanding by whatever name you call her and him. All God asks of us is that we give each other love. Thanks for giving MIP love. And please remember to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. If all hearts and minds are clear, it has been made plain.